But when you look at it, I actually think we are facing a significant crisis in British Columbia and in Canada.
Yes.
And some people say, oh, it's a climate crisis. No, climate is not a crisis. It's not an existential threat.
Right.
It is an issue, but it is not a crisis.
Right.
All the social issues stuff, they are not a crisis. They are problems.
Right.
We have a crisis. In British Columbia today, approximately 25% of your personal income taxes is just paying interest on our debt.
Exactly.
And we have a $9.5 billion deficit. And I suspect it's going to be much larger by the time we get to March.
Possibly 14.
Possibly high as 14. And so you're looking at this and thinking, like, how are we going to get out of this problem? This is a recipe for, if not bankruptcy, serious economic decline in this province.
And all the major projects are stopped.
Exactly.
Site C
is done. The LNG Canada, the Coastal GasLink, the Trans Mountain, all the big projects are done, and there's nothing else coming on the pipes.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people and friends that are watching us around the world, obviously say, oh, we know where Canada is, yeah, and British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And then Prince George, oh my goodness, Prince George is a city of about 80,000 people, probably 120,000 in the region. And we know that big city called Vancouver. Well, we are 500 miles north of Vancouver, and for our European friends, 800 kilometers. And today we have a very, very special guest. His name is John Rustad, and I've known John for quite a number of years, and John is very involved in politics, and a lot of things have happened to him, in particular in the last year, and politics in British Columbia is always extremely interesting. I do a program on the Brink on different issues, but also BC forest industry and transition, then crisis, and now virtually Rome is burning because it's major problems in the forest industry and other issues. John is an ideal person because he was just recently became the MLA for Nechako Lakes, west of Prince George, and he has been in politics for since 2005, and he was elected the first time. Since that time, he's been elected about four more times, and obviously recently again was elected as the LMLA for Nechako Lakes. But he is also the Conservative Party's leader in the province of British Columbia that nearly came this close to becoming the premier of the province. All of that happened in a very short duration, and we'll talk about that as we go forward. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me on. I look forward to our conversation.
So, tell us a little bit about, I already know a lot of stuff about you, a lot of other people do too in the region, but I in particular am interested in sharing with our people watching us about yourself, your background here in the Prince George region, your family's background in the region, because the Rustad family has been involved in the forest industry for many years. In fact, they came, correct me if I'm wrong, in 1947 to Prince George, started as the brothers, and developed sawmilling. And again, for our people watching from around the world, but also for British Columbia, in that time, in particular, 1947, there probably were 800 sawmills around the Prince George area. And there were smaller sawmills that would manufacture rough lumber, and they were loaded on trucks and then hauled to what they now call River Road, but it was then called Plainer Road. What did he do at Plainer Road, and why was it there? Well, but that was located next to the railroad. There were a number of planer mills. Rustad Brothers had one of them in that location, and they would plane the lumber and then put it in boxcars, send it mainly to the United States. Then the transition started to happening when I came to Prince George in 1965, and the transition already started to happening where a lot of consolidation took place. I believe the Rustads then started early 60s building a sawmill in what we call the BCR side, and it became a new generation of mills that needed to have included, in order to have access to crown timber, you had to have the ability to debark, to be chipping, and all the other things, because government had attracted pulp mill investments and they needed access to that fiber. So that then became the next generation, and I believe the Rustad family and a number of other ones operated sawmills here and planer mills, and I believe the Rustad sold out in 1991 to Northwood.
Yeah.
And then, so that's kind of the background. John has been involved. I believe you have two brothers that, and uncles and other family that were involved. You were involved in a company as well.
Yes, and so Rustad brothers actually related. Our side of the family was Gilhorn Lumber, and we had numerous sawmills as well.
Right.
That it was all the families had, as you said, right, all these sawmills that had built up over the years.
Right.
And we actually exited the sawmilling side of things in the 70s.
Right.
When Rustad brothers bought us out.
Right.
But we stayed involved, obviously, in forestry, and we're around in forestry. And so I've worked in tie mills. I've worked on outlogging. I've done all that kind of stuff and been involved in all those sort of aspects of forestry over that time, and watching that transition.
Right.
To the point where when I was running my own company, after obviously I was born and raised in Prince George, and started my own company called Western Geographic Information Systems. Yeah. And I had an office in Houston, BC, and an office in Prince George, and I did a lot of forestry consulting work. Correct. At that time. Did everything from timber supply analysis to forest development plans to watershed analysis, these types of things. Right. That I'd be involved in. So right. Yeah, it gave me a very good, solid backing of forestry. And even before I started my company, I worked for another consulting firm where I was out doing work in the field. Everything from timber supply, doing inventory work, laying out blocks, doing regen studies, all these types of work that Sure. You do in the field, as you well know.
Yeah.
So that's what that gave me the background, and it was and then the odd thing happened. In the year 2000, I was very upset with where the province was going, and you remember that time because you were involved. And they were involved too. And so I sat down with my wife and I actually said, what do you think about moving to Calgary? Yeah. And we could relocate the company and do this type of work that I was doing here in Alberta just as easy. And I had connections with the oil and gas sector. And Sure. So we had a long conversation about it. And ultimately we decided to stay in Prince George, to stay in British Columbia. Yeah. I mean, I love this province. I love where I live. I love up here in the interior. So that left me with two choices. Either I had to live with it or get involved and try to change it.
Or walk the talk, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
That's
politics,
what I did.
Politics was never an ambition of mine. It wasn't anything that I had, set out to do. I had a huge phobia of public speaking. Yeah. All the usual type things. And so I got involved in politics, became a school trustee for 3 years.
Yeah.
Found out
so that was in 2000.
In 2002. Yeah, 2002 was when I was first elected.
Yeah.
And then that's when I discovered I actually really like politics. I find it rather engaging, and so I was asked to consider running for a nomination for the riding. What that time was called Prince George Almanica.
Right.
And I had said to the people that asked me, I said, I think I love what I was doing as a trustee. I'd like to do another term, maybe hold off and not run this time. And the person who was the board chair at that time, Bill Christie.
Yeah.
He said to me that 26 years earlier, he had a chance to run provincially.
Right.
And he decided it wasn't timing right. He never got another chance.
Yeah.
And he said, politics, he gave me some very good advice. He said, politics is not about when you're ready. Politics is about when there's an opportunity.
Exactly.
And so that's when ultimately I decided to then go after the nomination and got elected in 2005.
Yeah, and so that again was it's and you have been watching politics already from before that, obviously, and so it's there is never a dull moment in politics in British Columbia.
as you know, right, over the decades, I mean, you and I both, saw politics from various angles,
Yeah.
over the decades here in British Columbia.
You were even involved in my campaign.
Yes,
Because I
way
had
back
the
then.
crazy idea, again, walking the talk,
Yes,
is I ran for MLA for the Prince George
Prince George Valemount riding.
Valemount riding,
Yeah,
and our friend Shirley Bond got the,
end up winning that nomination. Yeah,
which was good for me
well,
in a way.
and and Shirley did a great job,
It-
servicing this area over the decades.
yeah, no question.
But it's, I sort of looked at it really from a politics perspective. When you look at British Columbia, has always been known as being kind of this crazy or wacky politics,
Exactly.
and that partly came from W.A.C. Bennett, who was affectionately known as Wacky Bennett.
Yeah.
But really, when Gordon Campbell came in, suddenly we had this period of stability,
Yeah.
right? Where it's just, things kind of moved along, and in terms of politics.
Yeah.
And then when Gordon left, of course, that things became a little bit more unstable. And then, of course, they got unhinged
Right.
back in 2017. They've kind of bounced around since
So I'm
then.
going to just break you for a second here. Now, tell us about Kim.
About Kim?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Kim and I met actually doing theater way back in the mid 90s, early 90s. And so we became friends, got married in 1995. And we moved out to Clucas Lake, which is, of course, west of
And you
Prince
still
George,
have your
in
place there.
2009. And so we still live there. We still enjoy living.
Now,
Yeah,
I know, and I had a security fellow working for us, Royal Security.
Yep.
That was Kim's dad, I believe. And he worked for me in the 70s.
Yes.
He
He ran that company for a lot of years. He
Yeah.
passed away in 2022.
Yeah, so do you.
But yeah, so and actually Kim would once in a while do a little bit of work for Royal Securities as well.
Right.
But I mean, Kim has been involved in many things. She was an optician for years, and
Right.
I worked, of course, for Spirit of North Health Corps Foundation,
Right.
raising money for the healthcare here in the north, and then she eventually ended up running her own company,
Yeah.
where she did Royal Events, where she did a lot of things of
Right.
whether it's conferences or various other
Right.
types of events. When COVID came around, of course, when you're running a company that's involved with bringing people together and you're not allowed to do that, she decided at that point to retire.
Yeah. So it broke you off there for a minute. So you were going through, so we had Gordon Campbell there. So then you became part of government and you did a number of things. He had you in a number of portfolios.
Yeah, I went with Gordon. I was involved with. Was Parliamentary Secretary for Silviculture, Parliamentary Secretary for Forests. I was involved in what was called the Farm Assessment Review Panel. We did midterm timber supply work. So I did a lot of things. Matter of fact, I think I chaired more committees in the legislature than any other politician's ever done in history. I think I had 12 or 13 various committees that I had chaired over that time.
Right.
And then, of course, when Gordon left and Christie became premier, I took on a portfolio under her doing Aboriginal relations and reconciliation.
Yeah.
And under that portfolio, I was asked at the time, we had, as a government, we had signed what was called 10 non-treaty agreements.
Right.
And I was asked, or no, 8, I think it was. I was asked to sign another 10.
Right.
By the end of the 4 years, just over 4 years that I was in that portfolio, I think we signed 435 agreements.
Well over 400.
Yeah,
Yeah.
with First Nations, everything from forest development or forest revenue side to mining agreements to all the pipeline agreements. I was involved in quite a lot of work here with Christy. I very much enjoyed my time working with her.
So, and then for a short period, you were acting Minister of Forest?
Yeah, so in 2017, after that election, Christy asked me to take on Minister of Forest. So I was Minister of Forest for just a very short period of time before with the transition, of course, to the NDP taking over. So we didn't get a chance to do a whole lot in terms of the stuff, but it was, of course, we had huge wildfires that started up during that time as well. So
Exactly.
But I'd been in and around, the forest policy side of things, whether it was when I was Parliamentary Secretaries or even in the Aboriginal relations, because as you know, there isn't anything you do on the landscape today that isn't touched by the Indigenous file in
Yeah.
British Columbia. And so that was an important piece of so many ministries.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a little bit as we go forward, because that alone is very complex and complicated. So as you were in that role, and then taking us forward, take us to the more recent election with Kevin Falcon and the BC Liberals. And as I look back to the Socrats, who was Becky Bennett, obviously, right of center party, really. BC Liberals was something that was available, coincidental, became government. And then as we went forward, then something happened to you as being part of the BC Liberals. Maybe share us a little bit of
Sure.
that when you got fired.
So during the time after we lost government to the NDP, we stayed BC Liberals, but there was always this question mark about a name change and things like that. There's all these things going on. And then in after the 2020 election, the leader then, who was Andrew Wilkinson, stepped down, creating a leadership race. Lots of people had asked me to run for the leadership, and I said no, I wasn't interested in doing that. And I supported Ellis Ross,
Right.
who was the candidate, who was the MLA out of Skeena.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that leadership race went on. Kevin Falcon won the leadership race, and I talked to Kevin. I said, look, I'll do what you need to do. I'm a team player. I'll do the work, kind of thing. But I don't think Kevin was very happy with me in that I had been supporting Ellis in terms of that leadership race and some things that went on, of course, during that. But so I did the work, as a forestry critic under Kevin, and then in the spring of 2022, so a couple of years ago. There was an issue that the federal government had put forward, and they put forward a paper called the Farm Emissions Reduction Strategy.
Right.
And what that was really about was to stop using nitrogen-based fertilizer and to prevent cows from, excuse the expression, farting and belching, because somehow that was changing the weather.
Right.
Well, this policy approach would actually have a very significant impact on my riding. About 35% of my riding is, the economic activity is ranching.
Correct.
And so I tried to raise this within the BC Liberal Caucus and said, let's have a conversation about this. This is an important issue for my riding. And it kept getting put off and put off and put off. And then so finally in August, I thought, well, I want to be vocal on this. And so I put out, shared some information by Patrick Moore, former co-founder of Greenpeace, who has lots to say about the climate issues.
Exactly.
I saw it was on a Sunday, didn't think anything of it. Then on Wednesday, I was taking the day off because the next day was my birthday.
So this is the 17th?
August 17th, right?
And your birthday's Sunday.
My birthday's on the 18th. And so my
phone, you too, right?
My phone was lit up, right? And I was like, what was this issue? And I thought, no, you know what? I'm just taking the day off. I'm not going to worry about it. So that night I went through the messages and realized, okay, I've got to set up a call. So I set up a call with Kevin Falcon for the next day, which was my birthday.
Yeah.
And I called him. Of course, he was really upset with me, and I get it. Nobody wants to be put off when there's an issue that's burning. So he asked me. He said, you've got to take down this tweet. And I said, what tweet? And he said, well, this tweet you put out. I said, I didn't put out any tweets. Well, the retweet. The retweet. Yes, okay. And I said, well, look, Kevin, I've been trying to have this conversation. We need to be able to be clear in terms of what we're saying, because this is going to have a big impact on riding. And he said to me, look, you know where our party position is on this. You have a choice. You either have to toe the line with this and parrot our party position, or you can't be part of our caucus. And at that point, I thought, okay, wait a second here. I was elected to represent my riding. I was elected to, be able to speak out on behalf of my riding. And so I told him that, and he said, well, that's fine. And so we ended the conversation, and half an hour later, I was kicked out of caucus.
Yeah.
And I thought about it, and I thought, okay, I could just
retire.
I could just retire, right? I don't need to be doing this. And so once again, I sat down with my wife, and she said, no, you know what? You need to stay involved in this politics. You shouldn't pull the pin on this. We need a change in direction. So I spent 5 months at that point as an independent.
Yeah.
And I'd explored options, various things to do. But
Right.
ultimately, I started looking more and more at the Conservative Party in BC. And the Conservative Party in BC had not really been a going concern since the 1930s. I mean, the last time it formed a government was 1927 or somewhere in there.
Way back then, yeah.
Way back then. And so it hadn't elected anybody since the 1970s. It really wasn't a going concern.
No.
But I thought about it and I thought, there is such a desire for change in this province that there is an opportunity. So that's when I decided to join the Conservative Party in February of 2023.
And on the other hand, though, John, globally we see shifting more to the right of center in a lot of governments.
Yeah.
And then the way I kind of looked, a lot of other people looked at BC Liberals really was not very popular, the whole liberal thing.
Yes.
You see that federally. That's happening right now. And then, with all due respect, to Kevin and everybody else, BC United, what does that mean? That kind of a thing,
But I think ultimately, when Kevin took over, he looked at it from a perspective of the BC Liberals were struggling with the vote in the middle.
Yeah.
They were struggling on the vote on the Conservative side, but he thought, you know what, I think I can keep that vote on the Conservative side, but I need to go more to the left to get these people that are undecided in the middle.
Right.
And I disagreed with that strategy, but that's the leader's choice. That's where he wanted to go, and so it's fine. You work under that. But that really alienated the people on the right side of the political spectrum, and people were looking for home, and they had been for a number of elections, but they were really looking for a home.
Yeah.
And so that's what created the window and the opportunity. But what I found interesting, so when I took over the leadership of the Conservative Party, I mean, we had 800 members. It was didn't have any organization, had virtually no money, right? And so it was a process then to build that up over time. And lots of people just kept joining in us over time, and we just kept building through the process. But ultimately, what I found as we built this is the Conservative Party in British Columbia didn't follow the traditional pattern of conservative, politics. Usual conservative politics tend to be older people, tend to be, that side of things. And what we found is the coalition that we built was younger people. It was 18 to 35. It was immigrants that had typically have always been voting Liberal, but they were looking hard for change. They didn't like the direction that things were going. And so we actually put together a very unique coalition that has not been done in Canada before,
right,
as the Conservative Party in British Columbia. And actually where we struggled was where what was considered to be traditional Conservative territory.
Right. So, but you had only 3 months before the election would be called, and in the meantime, there you're building a party, and there you got people that are MLAs and the BC United, if you wish, coming to the Conservatives. So all of a sudden you have all these things are happening, and the election is
just
around
a few months away. Yeah, it was really quite a journey because I took over the leadership of the party at the end of March of 2023.
Right.
And then so we started building, and the real first test was a by-election in June of 2023.
Right.
Where we finished second in that by-election. That was a solid NDP riding.
Right.
But we've ended up finishing second, and the BC United Party actually finished fourth in that riding.
Yeah.
And that helped us continue to build momentum. And then just by chance, I was at an event in Abbotsford in late August, and I ran into Bruce Banman, who was the MLA for Abbotsford South.
Right.
And he said, well, why don't we get together and have a conversation? So
right.
I was back down in September in Abbotsford, and so I gave him a call, and we got together and had a beer and talked. And he said, okay, I'm interested in coming over.
Right.
And so him coming over set in motion a real shift and change for us as the Conservative Party, because in British Columbia, the NDP had changed the rules so that only two people, or actually I think it was the BC Liberals, I should say, in 2017 changed the rules so that only two elected MLAs were required to become an official party status.
Okay.
So with Bruce coming over and joining us, we now had official party status, which changed things.
Yeah.
Gave us some money, in terms of the legislature.
Yeah.
Gave us question every day in question period. And so it changed how things are going, which
gave you the profile.
continued to help to build our momentum. And then there was a number of other MLAs with the BC United that had expressed some interest, and so there were some talks and back and forth.
Right.
But ultimately, it was back in the summer of 2024 where a number of other MLAs came over that really started to build that momentum, with just like you say, a few months to go to get into the election.
Well, October the 19th. What was it? October the 19th?
October 19th for the election, and so.
So you're 3 months away, or 2 months away, 2.5 months away, somewhere around.
Well, and I mean, as a political entity, I mean, we didn't have the fundraising structure. Fundraising was picking up and going in there, but we were nowhere close to what we needed.
No.
And so ultimately, with them coming over, it really started that momentum building. And then Kevin made the very brave decision to suspend the BC United's campaign, and he surprised all of his candidates and the MLAs. It created a huge problem within their organization, but ultimately that just led to a huge boost for us in terms of fundraising. And
so I think 2 days before that, he was on my podcast. I hope that didn't have an effect on it. So, no, I'm just being funny about it. But yeah, he was on my podcast. I had no idea.
Well,
it got everybody by.
It came together so fast.
Yeah.
And because we had some unofficial talks, some backroom talks kind of thing. We didn't do anything sort of official or any, all the way through that year leading up to it.
My view was, you guys have to get together, and saying that will be, a viable alternative to the change that has to happen.
And so ultimately, there was a conversation, and it was on a Sunday. It was a conversation between a couple of people, our executive director and our president, with 2 people from the board of the BC United Party. And that was on a Sunday. And so conversation went relatively well. And so, I was kind of from Missouri at that point, right? I mean, we'd had so many starts and stops kind of thing. It was like, okay, I can't be too concerned about it. Well, so they decided to meet again on the Tuesday. And Kevin came in and actually partway through that meeting got involved with that meeting. And said, and so after halfway through that meeting, I got a phone call from people saying, look, we're serious about trying to get this done and we want to get it done right away. So I was busy, of course, on that day. So I said, okay, I've got time at 9:00 that night. And this is now Tuesday night. And so we reconvened that meeting at 9:00 Tuesday night. It was the first time that, Kevin and I had actually officially met since I had left the BC United Party,
right?
BC Liberal Party at the time. And so we spent about 2.5 hours hammering through some details. And then Wednesday morning we rolled out, finished the stuff, and then rolled out the announcement that we were going to work together, and he was going to suspend the campaign.
Right.
So, and that was at the end of August. So that, and of course, the election was just going to start 3.5 weeks later.
Exactly.
So now we're in the situation of how do we try to put these pieces together? And of course, they had candidates and MLAs, and we had candidates and people that had been working for, almost a year on their campaigns on our side. So we did the best we could to kind of make some things fit, but obviously, lots of people would have preferred some different outcomes.
Yeah, but then again, it's 3.5 weeks before the so it is amazing, really, though, from somebody that knows politics and what happens in those kind of things, how it all came together and how well you did and the Conservatives did in the process. You ended up with virtually
44 elected, and I mean, literally a year and a half earlier, the Conservative Party had no MLAs.
Yeah.
So in a year and a half, we went from 0 to just short of forming government, and it's it speaks volumes to what the change that people were looking for in British Columbia. And I mean, there's could we have done a few things different? I think there's obviously things that could have gone better or could have gone different, which would have meant we would have formed
not right, because especially in that kind of a time frame is.
But a lot of things that we had done, I was convinced that David Eby would call an election in March of 2024.
Right.
For the life of me, I couldn't believe, why would he be silly enough to hold off and wait till October? Your opposition is divided.
Yeah.
Nobody is ready for it. They could have dropped the writ and they would have won a supermajority.
Yeah.
I mean, they were that far ahead, right? There was just no chance. And so we were doing everything we can to prep, to get our candidates in place, to prep and do everything to get ready for an election in March. And then when they didn't drop the writ, I was looking around thinking, are these guys crazy? Why are they not doing this? Yeah. So that then gave us an extra 6 months longer than I thought we would have.
But they totally underestimated likely what was happening
behind the
ground.
scenes and on exactly. They underestimated what was happening in the public.
Exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, it's quite a journey, that's for sure.
What an
Nobody's
experience.
done this.
Now, at the same time, now though, with 44 seats, and and IBI with the Greens, so it's 93 seats
So
altogether.
he's got 47 MLAs, and then
Yeah.
the Greens they've
Two.
signed an agreement with the Green Party to support them on a confidence vote for 1 year, and it's renewable every year kind of thing.
Right.
So
that's where we are now, and so you're official opposition, and there is a lot of stuff to work with, in particular things that are on people's minds.
well,
And
the interesting thing about what we did, like we have now the largest opposition in BC's history.
right,
We have the largest number of new MLAs elected into opposition in BC's history. As a Conservative caucus, we have the largest percentage of women elected of anywhere in the country as a percentage of our caucus. We've got 22% of our people are ethnic minority elected. It's a very different group
yeah.
from what people would expect from a Conservative caucus. And so, the job, and everybody's chomping at the bit. And of course, there's always, as all families have, you got some disputes of where we're at and stuff. But people are really chomping at the bit to go after the NDP and to hold them account for what's going on.
So the challenge for you will be to hold it together and to become an effective opposition. And you have lots of material to work with, but the key is, as you already indicated, all these people coming together, and and the opposition caucus. The key is to bring it together to the next election, obviously.
Yeah, and that's the work that we're doing. And as with everything, I'm expecting there's going to be some bumps and some misfires and stuff along the way. That's normal,
Yeah.
in terms of it, and so we'll do our best to work through that. But fortunately, the NDP are giving us lots of material to work on, especially with things like forestry.
That's what I was saying. So that then being said, the health issues, is a major issue. We can talk about that for an hour. Likely, I believe it's a major issue. Housing is a major issue. Economy is, we're spending money like drunken sailors. We're shipping it out of it's going crazy. We were not going to hire any more people, and that is still all going. So it's
But when you look at it, I actually think we are facing a significant crisis in British Columbia and in Canada.
yes.
And some people say, oh, it's a climate crisis. No, climate is not a crisis. It's not an existential threat.
Right.
Right. It is an issue,
Yeah.
but it is not a crisis.
Right.
All the social issues stuff, they are not a crisis. They are problems.
Right.
We have a crisis. In British Columbia today, approximately 25% of your personal income taxes is just paying interest on our debt.
Exactly.
And we have a $9.5 billion deficit. And I suspect it's going to be much larger by the time we get to March.
Possibly 14.
Possibly high as 14. And so you're looking at this and thinking, like, how are we going to get out of this problem? This is a recipe for, if not bankruptcy, serious economic decline in this province.
And all the major projects are stopped.
Exactly.
Site C is
Site C is done. The LNG Canada, the Coastal GasLink, the Trans Mountain, all the big projects are done, and there's nothing else coming on the pipes.
And then at the same time, obviously, then talking about the forest industry a little bit more later, but adding the forest industry, we used to have 120 sawmills in British Columbia. Now we're down to something like 60. We used to employ 180,000 people. We're now somewhere in half of that.
I think it's even less than that now. But
it's likely even less than that. And at the same time, what concerns the people in a general sense is that I look at the incumbent government under Premier Ibby, the NDP. We have no representation in government in Victoria, other than we have 3 NDP MLAs, I believe, in the Kootenay region, and
two in the Kootenays, one in Vernon, and one in Prince Rupert, and none of them have any significant portfolios.
So What do we do? And now we look at northern British Columbia in particular in relation to that. Lumber manufacturing or the sawmill industry, which used to be the economic driver really in the province.
You realize today the revenue that is coming out of our forest industry isn't even paying for the cost, the overhead cost in the Ministry of Forests.
Right.
That's crazy when you
Crazy.
think about it. We've gone from a cut of about 75 million cubic meters a year
Yeah.
to a cut. This year, I think we're going to be under 30. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 27 or 28 million cubic meters.
It
That's
used
it.
to be, John, from my perspective at least, that 70 million cubic meters annually was about the average
Yeah.
that we had. And then, with all the changes that have taken place, it's gone down to 50 available. But of that 50 available, to get it into permits, is probably less than half of that, 25 million.
Exactly. And so this is why I say we have a crisis, and we actually need to treat it like a crisis.
Yeah.
We have a revenue problem.
Right.
And if we want to improve healthcare, if we want to deal with the drugs and the crime on our streets, if we want to see our quality of life improving in this province, we actually have to treat this like the crisis it is.
Exactly.
And that means we have to get off our butts and actually get things approved and done. For example, in the mining sector, there's 16 or 17 mines today that are ready to go. And it takes between 12 and 15 years to get a mining permit in this province to get things done.
Inexcusable.
And so those mines, if we were to take a crisis approach and approve and get those mines going, not to mention all the revenue that come in from the investment, the billions of dollars to build these mines, but once they start operating, the revenue that goes to government from this operating would almost be enough just to get rid of our deficit, just the mining industry alone.
Exactly.
And we have to do the same thing when it comes to forestry or when it comes to our other resources. And even when it comes to technology or any of the other sectors we have in the province, it takes far too long. Just for example, the average time it takes to do a building permit in the Lower Mainland is 3 years. If you're lucky. You can go to Denmark, which is a country that has at least
4 weeks.
At least what we have for environmental standards, and a maximum time it takes is 2 months.
Yeah.
Why does it take 3 years?
Yeah.
And and I just look at it like a city like Vancouver. I mean, they got lots of issues with Vancouver.
Sure.
But they have 274 bylaws associated with housing.
Yeah.
And you put in a project, it's going to touch at least 50 people's hands before it gets approved.
Yeah.
How is it that we built it up to this point that you just can't get anything done? This has to change.
And the interesting part about it, the bizarre part of it actually is this. I've done several programs that I do, BC Forest Industry in Transition. That's how I started about 2 years ago doing some of my podcasting. Then I changed it to BC Forest Industry in Crisis. But I say now Rome is burning.
Yeah.
And they're not doing anything.
I mean, you look at it, Canfor is going to pack up and leave.
They have decided to leave. They are.
The Sand Group, which made a $400 million investment, I think it was a $200 million investment, they're now on the verge of bankruptcy.
Right.
You've got all these operations that are shutting down. That you've got companies like, for example, Nechako Lumber in my riding. It's down to one shift.
Yeah.
And I asked them, what's the problem? They say they can't get wood.
Yeah.
They just can't get wood. It's been 3 years. And the BC timber sales in my area, which puts about 2 million cubic meters a year, and just for people's context, because everybody's wondering how much is a million cubic meters, right? It sounds like a big number. That's enough wood to run 3 reasonably sized sawmills every year.
Yeah.
And they have 2 million cubic meters, and they've put out 0 volume in 3 years.
Yeah.
How do you operate? You need access to this fiber.
Yeah.
And so everybody is like, I can't do business in BC. Yeah. That's what has to change. We have to be able to, fiber needs to be made available, but we have to be able to actually be able to do business.
So if I look at, like British Columbia, it is paradise. I fly around a lot and I look, it's paradise. We got lots of timber, we got lots of resources. It takes genius to screw it up, but we did it.
It takes a very concerted effort to get us to as bad a shape as we're in.
So, and at the same time, what it does, John, which is troubling to me and to you as well, I'm sure, is that, but develop this province of British Columbia, in particular northern British Columbia, is entrepreneurship that happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s. These individuals that laid awake at nights and and had the dream of creating this, that, and the other thing
People
that
willing to
then
take risk.
attracted capital, right?
People willing to take risk with a
Yeah.
reasonable expectation for return.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I also look at it from this perspective. People say, oh, you're talking about companies. No, this is about the average worker.
Yeah.
This is about people being able to feed their family. This is about being able to pay good wages. This is about attracting the investment needed to improve that quality of life.
Exactly.
And whether it's forestry or mining or whether it's technology or manufacturing, it doesn't matter, or even agriculture.
Right.
You need to be able to have that.
Yeah.
And when people lose confidence to be able to do the investment, then what ends up happening is you end up eating capital, slowly starts deteriorating to the point where it collapses and it goes away.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing right now with our forest sector.
Exactly.
If it takes 3 years to get a permit, and here's another one that just absolutely drives me nuts, and you will know all about this sort of thing, but we've had some big wildfires, obviously, and we can talk about management of forests if you'd like to get into that, but down in Merritt, where there's probably 1, 2 million, 3 million cubic meters of wood that has been burnt, that is going to fall over and die.
Yeah.
It's going to rot.
Yeah.
Company that's down there in Merritt, the one last sawmill that's left in Merritt, is trying to get permits. And they are continually struggling, and they've been years and getting just 1 or 2 permits.
Yeah.
And so they're continually having to lay off their staff and then bring them back and lay off their staff. And meanwhile, the permits are not being issued.
No.
And there's no reason for it. 3 years is crazy when it takes that long. You go across the border at Alberta, in an area that's burnt, where they'll go in within 3 weeks, and they'll have permits, and they'll be in there. They'll be doing the salvage. They'll be doing the cleanup. They're doing the site prep. They're getting the planting. They're getting all the rehabilitation work to get it back to a healthy forest.
Yeah.
And it takes us 3 years just to try to get a permit.
Yeah.
This is unacceptable.
Yeah. So it has to change, right? So we have to show that we are aware. I made an investment in Alberta in 2005. I bought one of their larger secondary manufacturing plants, Palliser Lumber, and the day after I bought it, and I got a phone call from the Minister of Natural Resources there, as they call them, and he said, "Welcome to Alberta. What can I do for you?" I said, "What?"
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, so this is an opportunity." I said, "I would like you to come down and spend a day with me, and so we can talk about our operations and what we want to do." And so he said, "When?" I said, "Oh my God, Wednesday?" He said, "I'll be there Wednesday morning."
Yeah. And this is a difference.
That has never happened here.
No,
Ever.
Exactly. And CAD4, is an operation. I went and met with Don Kane, from CAD4 back, it was a couple of years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago when I was critic. And he said, that's the first time somebody's come to my office to meet.
Yeah.
When they did their board meetings in BC, of course, that's where, because they had all their major operations here. They've moved now. They're doing their board operations down in the southeast of the United States. And when they fly into the board meetings, the governor meets them at the plane.
Right.
Thanks them for coming. Talks about what's going on. What can they do? How do they set the environment up? That's the difference. Yeah. We treat them with hostility.
Yeah.
They welcome them with open arms because they're creating jobs and they're driving revenue for their jurisdiction. And we just seem to take it for granted. We think we have this beautiful jurisdiction. Everybody should just want to come here.
Yeah.
That's not the way it is.
No.
We need a government that actually respects the people who invest.
Right.
And most importantly, we need it so that it generates those jobs and that revenue that's needed to have our province be prosperous.
And add more social and economic value to that resource. That's what it's all about.
Of course, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at it and you think, we got a current government that loves to talk about, we want to have, value, not volume kind of thing, right? And they've completely destroyed the primary sector, the part of it.
Yeah.
But I actually look at it and I think, we need a complete shift, and it can start with something like stumpage. So stumpage, for example, as you know, right, is what you pay for your access to the fiber on the landscape.
It's a taxation, actually.
I want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I actually want to put a tax on the end product, whether that's electrons or 2x4s, whether that's pulp, or veneer, whatever it may be. But the intent would be to have an input credit so that the more you can do with the fiber, you can write off cost against your input, against
Exactly.
that end tax.
Right.
So in other words, it creates an incentive to do more. Do
Right.
more with the fiber that's on the landscape, so you're
Right.
not leaving as much behind in the woods,
Right.
and do more in terms of adding value, because the more you do, the less you'll end up paying in terms of stumpage. And
Yeah.
government will make the money at the back end because it creates the jobs in the other side of it that's needed.
Exactly. So I've been in business with my company, the Brink Forest Products and the Brink group of companies. We have 4 silos. The one silo is lumber remanufacturing and manufacturing in particular. The other silo is warehousing, distribution, logistics. The other one is real estate, residential, commercial, and industrial. And then the other one is media. So most of those are doing well, but the lumber manufacturing, this is my 50th year. Never had a handout from government.
Congratulations
Well,
to
thank you.
being old. Not many people can make it through that many years.
No, but the biggest challenge for me has been, John, access to fiber.
Yes.
And that includes lumber manufacturing. The first 30 years we bought mainly low-grade lumber and then blocks and other things. And we want to expand, but all the mills are shutting down around us, obviously, and Canfor being one of them. And I have been in the process of trying to acquire one of those mills, paying them market price.
Yep.
But it has become very, very difficult, and I'm not seeing the support for companies like us. We're not looking for money. Simply what we want to get is access to the fiber.
Yeah.
And that means that the way I see the future for lumber manufacturing is that just making 2x4s be beyond that. We have to, the new mills will be smaller. They will be more in the regions where the timber grows, see if you wish. The mills will be smaller. There will be more innovation. There will be, less people employed, and innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary.
Yes.
Like what we are doing is that, finger jointing is only one part of it, but CLT and all the other things that we can do. That to me is the model.
Exactly. And I think the mill of the future needs to generate power. It needs to have pellets. It needs to have, of course, the offtake of chips and things that go through there.
Right.
It needs to have your primary breakdown, but it also needs to look at whatever other secondary products that you can get from that, and from the volume coming in. So you need to have the whole log come in, and then it is processed with all the little bits and pieces going to the components at a one site, so that you're one touch in the forest. You're bringing the log in, and then it is processed there efficiently to the various streams and is as one unit. That is where the operation will need to be in the future.
So what we are doing is we're working closely with, and we are under some NDAs, but closely working with First Nations, because that is the new reality.
Yep.
And looking at primary manufacturing, controlling forest, and then precisely that model, doing innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary. And the different regions, we're looking at the Houston area, one of your ridings, and we're looking, obviously we have an operation in Vanderhoof, and then the one in Prince George. But I spent 50 years on my knees, virtually begging for wood, not money, not tenure, but just getting access to lumber manufacturing or blocks has been extremely difficult, and government has been more. We've been successful in spite of government, not because of them.
And I don't think we could ever get to this type of a model, but I love the thought of this model, and that is to separate the manufacturing from the harvesting, from the trees, from the growing, getting to an area-based tenure, so that you're tending the trees.
That's what I like.
To a much higher extent. You're essentially farming. You're maximizing your volume. You want to try to maximize what you can get from it. I would love to get to that type of model at some point. I don't know if it's possible.
So this is what happens in Sweden, and you've seen this.
I know the Sweden model.
So and I've spent time in Europe, and I spent time in Sweden, and so the ownership of timber is different than it is here, but they get 50% more volume per hectare than we do.
Look, we have the same timber harvesting land base as they have.
Yeah,
And
virtually the same size.
they are harvesting, as you said, we could be at 50 million. They're at 100 million.
Yeah. And
And
so the interesting part about that, John, sorry to interrupt you because I get all excited about this, is because they were at the same point that we were 40, 50 years
yes,
ago, and then they changed
they innovated and
and
changed the models.
innovated. And the problem they have today is they got too much fiber available, not enough capacity.
Yeah.
And they are sitting somewhere around between 100 and 120 million cubic meters
we
annually.
we could be doing the same thing here, but the thing is we have this view of our forests, and historically this has been the case, where there's always the next valley to heart, and so it's just a matter of we're going to plant the trees, then we're going to let nature just take its course,
Yeah.
instead of going in and managing and farming and dealing and managing fiber. And because there's been always the next valley, always the next watershed to go after, we've never worried about utilizing all the fiber, because we just take what we need out of it, we leave the rest, and
It's
we
the
go on to
land
the
of
next.
plenty, right?
And so that's changed. And so our whole thinking on forestry needs to change
From the ground up.
from the ground up the whole way.
Yeah.
And that includes, the tenure and how the tenures are done. I like the idea of having a use it or lose it policy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I talked about when I talked about changing stumpage is the highest stumpage you'll pay is on something that's exported. Obviously, the more you do locally, the less you'll pay, and it creates that incentive in place with it.
Yeah.
But we also have to look at our entire cost structure. Like, we are, as you know, by far the highest cost producers in North America,
Yeah.
if not in the world.
Yeah.
And that can't happen. When you're the highest cost, whenever there's any disruption, you're the first to go down.
Yeah.
You're the last ones to get investment. We need to bring that cost down into the middle or into the lower third.
Yeah.
And so we have to do a hard look at everything we do, everything from the carbon tax, which has to go.
Yeah.
That's just ridiculous,
and
right?
I
It's got to
agree
go.
with
But everything through all of these costs, and time
Yeah.
as well as one of those costs,
Yeah.
to say, how do we get our industry to be competitive?
Now, and we can go on for another hour.
Oh, I know.
But so the one thing that I was going to say, but is important to me, I look at, north of Hope, that probably you know better than I do, probably I say 60, 75, 80% of the GDP of the province of British Columbia is generated in northern British Columbia, north of Hope.
It's actually, the numbers have changed a little bit. You might be surprised by this. Almost 70% of our GDP in this province is now consumer.
Right.
However, when you look at our export, that first dollar that's created, yeah, that's where you get 60, 70% that comes from Hope North.
Right.
In terms of, because that's where, whether it's agriculture, whether it's stuff, other than the agriculture based in the Lower Mainland, there is some manufacturing in the Lower Mainland, that side of it, but when you're looking at those first dollars, it really does depend on the rest of the province.
Yeah. And then the other part that has always been something that I feel very strongly about it is that I've been very involved with the University of Northern British Columbia, as we all have, obviously, to get that off the ground, in the College of New Caledonia. And so trades will become a critical part. And I obviously was quite involved with the College of New Caledonia. And
I love that investment that you made. It made a huge difference for that facility and what they're able to do.
Yeah, John A. Brink Trades and Technology Center.
Yes.
I want to go beyond that, and I've been working on that. We need a center of, I call it the center of excellence. If you wish, a miniature BCIT that we have here, because I think recently in the last year or so, another $250 million was spent. I love BCIT, and I did several presentations there. The last time I was there, I have to go to a building. I have no idea where, my God, there's so many buildings there. So, but we need to invest in a center of excellence here in northern British Columbia.
But we actually need to rethink our labor force in general in British Columbia. And this is the old saying, it's been true for decades or two, at least a couple of decades. We got 1 million job openings for the next 10 years. Everybody says that, right, in terms of it. It's true, because when you look at attrition and people retiring and this sort of thing, that's what happens. But we're only graduating 500,000 kids. That means we need 50,000 people coming into this province every year just to keep up.
Yeah.
And so we need to rethink how we are doing immigration. It's one of the reasons why I think we need
Exactly.
to take control of our own immigration
I agree.
in British Columbia.
Yeah.
We need to rethink how that training works for people coming in, where they're fitting in,
Right.
as well as the training locally and how that is meeting those needs within British Columbia,
Right.
given the constraints that we have.
Right.
And right now, it's kind of just happening,
Yeah.
and it's not fulfilling what we need. And so we're stumbling along. We got people come in, we don't have housing. I used to like to joke and saying, well, look, we got to really deal with immigration in terms of the side. First thing they have to do is build their own home, because we don't have enough carpenters, we don't have enough electricians, we don't have enough truck drivers, we don't have enough of all these skills that are needed to be able to do what we have to meet, to meet the needs and demands we have in today. And the forest sector, as well as other resource sectors, are going to be in very short supply of these professional tradespeople, especially because we're going through this transition, and a lot of people are going to exit the industry, and it's going to be hard to bring them back.
No question about it. And the biggest problem that I have had in the 50 years that I had my company here has been, and I do a lot of presentations to young people and saying, finding people that I can pay $120,000 a year. They say, oh, I'll take that. No, that's not the point. Give me the skill sets.
Yes.
And so it's not difficult to find the entrepreneurship. Right now it is politically here, or to attract the capital. But I said, when I made that donation to the Trades and Technology Center here of the college, is finding the skill sets. That's the critical part, because you will not attract. You need stable government for one, but you also need opportunity, and you have to find the skill sets to attract capital here into the market. And the future lies north of Hope.
Yes. It's interesting. When I was a school trustee, so before I got into provincial politics, I met with a lot of industry that were looking for tradespeople, whether it was construction or whether it was various forestry or other industries. And what they said to me was this: we can teach skills. What we need is attitude. We need an education system that helps to instill in people the right attitude to be able to go to a job. It's not sitting in a bean chair, getting $100,000 a year and getting, spending time throwing balls at a basketball hoop. It is, people who are willing to put their shoulder to the wheel, who are prepared to do what it takes to make things work, and are prepared to learn, right? Have come in with that can-do attitude. And because I talked to them, I said, well, if we have trained people here and there, and they said, if you could get us that one skill set, that would put us so far ahead, because then we can support all the rest of the training and everything else that's needed to be done. But that is the one skill set that seems to be missing from our society.
I agree with you 100%. I have to tell you one thing about me. I was born in 1940. We were liberated in the long story in between. South Artemis, that we should not have seen, got liberated by the Canadian Army, April the 12th, 1945. Made such an impression on me that I knew from the time I was 5 years old I was going to go to the land of my heroes, Canada. And then the other thing that I was not overly successful in school. I failed grade 3 and failed grade 7 3 times. And then he said, what are you going to do with this guy? Well, maybe send him to the mentally challenged school. I said, no, we're not going to do that. Let's teach him a trade. So they sent me. My dad had been in lumber and then had a friend that had a furniture factory. He sent me there at 12 and a half years old. And it was much, much later that here in Prince George, actually, that I found I had ADHD. That was one of the reasons. But so the dream was for me to come to Canada, and then when I came to Canada, to build my own lumber mill. But I wanted to start with nothing, to prove to me that I was just as smart as the other people, not better than, but that I could get things done. And so I left Holland with a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then then I got here at the bus, and you've seen the story. And so I got here with the bus, Greyhound bus. Unfortunately, the building is about 2 blocks away from where it used to be anyway. And so I had my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I counted my money at least 3 times. I had $25.47. But what I did have is, as you already said, attitude. I've always been a believer. I avoid negative. I always believe that tomorrow will be a better day if today is a tough one, and I will never give up. And then the other one, I have passion. Whatever I do, I give it 125%. And work ethic,
Yep.
that I work harder than anybody. I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late.
My story is similar to yours in that, I've got that drive, I've got that passion, I've got that work ethic, and I've had that in everything I've done. I remember when I was going to school, when I was going to high school, I had a summer job at a plant, and we were producing culverts. And so they needed somebody to help out with filling the tar pit and doing the various things. And so I hustled and I did all this stuff right. And one day I was, they're running down on work. I'd done everything I need to do, so I picked up a broom and started sweeping up. And one of the people on the floor said, "Slow down, make the work last." And I'm like, this was such an alien concept to me, because I just, you do the job, you're there, you work hard, you get it done,
Yeah.
and you go on to the next thing that needs to happen. But that's, unfortunately, that seems to be missing a lot in our society today.
The point that I'm making is this one: growing up during the war years and having been in that environment, a lot of people think that, respectfully, that once you have war, then once the war is over, everything goes back to normal. No, it doesn't. It can take generations. I'm still affected by PTSD, the inner child, and other things relating to the war.
Yeah.
But when I came to Canada and I look around, it's paradise. We have the best that anybody can wish, and we are the envy of the world around us in British Columbia. It's the land of opportunity.
The one thing that has always stuck to me, and somebody said this to me many years ago: Canada is the solution looking for a problem.
Exactly.
And that's what has to change. We have so much opportunity. British Columbia could be the wealthiest province in Canada.
No question.
And Canada could be one of the powerhouses in the world economically. And I think it was Peter Brown who once said, the problem is we've got all this opportunity, we've got all this potential, but we are hopelessly managed at all levels of government.
Yeah.
And so that's what needs to change.
It takes genius to screw up. I'm working on a book on the forest industry in British Columbia, and I don't know if you know. Have you read any of my books?
I haven't had a chance to read them. No, I've seen them. Yes.
Have you got them all?
I don't have them. No.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna, before you leave, I'm gonna sign you a copy of my book.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you
as well, John. It was a pleasure to have you,
John.
on my
thanks
podcast.
for having me on. Yeah.
And let's make sure we stay in touch. And thank you again. And for all those people watching us from around the world, is that John Rustad is the MLA and the official opposition in this beautiful province called British Columbia, and obviously has plans at some point to become government, and has done these amazing things in terms of developing the BC Conservatives, and has done a fabulous job, and it was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me on. I look forward to another conversation.
We'll do that. Thanks,
Take care.